Welcome to the Lit Marriage Podcast with authors and Christian relationship coaches Cassidy and Daniela Parlane. On this podcast, you will discover how to transform your marriage from autopilot mode to keeping the flame of purpose, passion, and romance lit in the marriage that God designed for you to have. Learn to love intentionally together. Are you ready to keep it lit? Here we go.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Lit Marriage Podcast. We are your hosts, Cassidy
And Daniela.
And today, folks, we want to talk to you about the subject of how to avoid or recognize toxic cycles in your marriage. This is one of those conversations that is worth having when you think about the rise in divorce that is happening all around us.
So true.
And in light of everything that is happening in our world right now, right?
That's so true.
People are not able to navigate through the difficult times that they're having, and there's this compound. It's kind of like compounding interest, if you know what I mean.
That's exactly what it is.
So you didn't deal with it, and as a result of that, things start to compound. And
emotions.
Yes. And it's that much more difficult to get out of the rut of some of these toxic cycles. Perhaps you are out there listening right now, and maybe you're wondering, what are some of these toxic cycles that we are discussing here today? So I'm just going to throw this question out to you, Daniela. Can you tell our listening audience what some of these toxic cycles can look like?
Oh, they come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Okay. But a few examples I could think of off the top of my head would be, for example, the meddling in-law. Mother-in-law or father-in-law is one example. Right. Or sister-in-law or somebody, right? That is constantly meddling, always having something to say.
Right.
Just having to have their input in causing a wedge.
Right.
In your marriage. And I mean, I think we've all met someone who's actually had that kind of issue before. That's one very common one. And it could also be a friend. It could be like one of your besties who's causing a wedge, who is just kind of maybe a little too clingy, and you're just not this person that you keep finding yourself in these cycles where this friend is causing you and your spouse to have fights or disagreements.
Wow.
And you just don't deal with it. Right? And it's only a matter of time before you start fighting about that again.
Right.
It could be your spouse, or you are a workaholic. And you're, in many cases, people become workaholics when they're trying to, I mean, obviously there's legitimate reasons where you need to pay your bills.
Right.
And you need to work the hours to make the money. But there are legitimate cases, I believe, where people become workaholics because they're actually trying to avoid the home front. It's like it's kind of almost like a defense mechanism, like an avoidance mechanism. Right. So we don't have to fix whatever issues going on at home. So you become a workaholic, and it becomes a cycle in your marriage. And then, of course, you know how the cycle goes. The spouse gets upset. You've been working so many hours. You're neglecting us. Fight happens. We have to pay the bills. Somebody's got to work hard. And then it just keeps on bubbling and bubbling, right? And the tension keeps growing, getting worse. Another common one, I think, is as simple as building wrong relationships. Wow. And this could actually be couples. It could be you both, like the couple is actually surrounded by just dysfunctional relationships. People you probably don't want to, they're not really the best. Right. You shouldn't, they're just not the best influence on your marriage. And especially if you already have maybe a weakness in certain areas, and you tend to hang with people who have common weaknesses, right? Right. It could really put a stressor on your marriage, because when you need the most support, and especially if you have these bad relationships, you're lacking accountability partners.
Right.
These aren't the kind of people, they're like what we call buddies versus accountability partners.
Right.
They're just there to hang with you, maybe drink with you, kind of they're there when you're low. They kind of make you feel good in that moment because you can vent with them and stuff, but they're not really there to help pick you up.
Wow.
They're not giving you what you need to hear. They tell you what you want to hear, you know? That's the kind of thing. That doesn't help anything in your marriage. Like anything get better, I should say. Kind of keeps you in the same level.
Same cycle.
And it'll just keep repeating. Here's a great example. Like maybe you tried to stop smoking or stop drinking or whatever. Something that you're weak at, but those people that's what they do. Right. And you keep finding yourself going back to these vices that you know are destructive and they're hurtful to your spouse or to yourself. Right? So you find yourself in the cycle because when you're with them, guess what? Gotta go have a puff or gotta go do this. Right. And before you know it, you become addicted. If you already aren't. Right. And it's that much harder to get out of it.
And you can actually become destructive to not just yourself, but obviously as we're talking about these cycles in the marriage, right? So again, compounding on top.
Right. And here's one that we've seen pretty often with people that we've coached as well is you start to pick up the behaviors of the people you surround yourself with. Wow. So if you hang around people who have a terrible marriage and you're kind of on the same level ground with them, you start to behave like them. And then that affects your marriage. And that becomes a cycle. And that can be extremely toxic. Another common one we find is financial issues due to lavish spending. Oh yes, you find yourself in debt, or you find yourself, or like even something like a vice, like gambling, or I gotta do this, or I gotta do that thing that you spend on constantly, and it's putting a stress on your marriage because now you're having trouble catching up with the bills. Right. You know, that whole compounding interest situation happens literally with your credit card. And that adds so much tension and stress. Yeah. And then you find yourself fighting about money. Money. And when you talk about money,
people get funny.
That's right. So there's that. This is a bad one, really bad one. I mean, they're all bad, but cheating. And that often happens because of lack of boundaries. Wow. And if you just had the boundaries in place, maybe it wouldn't be so easy to fall into that trap of, it just happened.
Can you
Things
imagine?
Don't just happen.
There's so much grace that is required in all of these situations from the other spouse. Right. So much grace. So for example, if there's just one person that is inflicting these particular cycles, the other spouse, can you imagine how much like Jesus they have to be in this situation? Yeah. Because when you think about it, we have all been in toxic cycles in our lives. Mm-hmm. All of us.
That's true.
And when you bring your toxic cycle from your single life into your marriage life, now that's something, you know. And we see this all too often, where you never dealt with the cycle in your past.
That's right. And then you're bringing that baggage into the current situation with your spouse. Right.
And I've even seen this where you don't actually take godly and mature advice in dealing with some of these things. So, for example, you're chasing the wind, looking for the next fix for your marriage, but you never actually took the advice that was given to you initially, and perhaps that was God speaking through that person and saying, you may need to change this, or you may need to address this, or you may need to address that. And they're looking at things from a bird's eye view because they're looking from outside. And oftentimes when people are looking from the outside, they can see things that you can't see because now
you're in it.
They're like the blind spot. And they can see what you can't see. They have a totally different perspective. And so perhaps there is somebody that is in your life that has given you information that you did nothing with. And then we blame God when our marriage starts to fail. Or we blame the church, or we blame this, or we blame that.
Isn't that such a common cycle? Like this has happened in my own life where I would have a specific person come to me and ask me, please, I need advice, tears pouring down, like I need to know what to do. And I'm like, honestly, this is what I would do.
Right.
And I would prayerfully, make sure I'm giving them godly advice. And they would listen. And then the next day they'd turn around and go do the exact opposite. And then it would happen again. I'd see like the cycle. I need that advice. It's just human nature. Yeah.
It's just human nature.
People do that. I think people do that. It's almost like they want to hear advice, but if it's not what they want to hear,
right, then
they won't do it. But deep down they know that they have to do something,
right,
but they refuse to do it. They want to do what's easier, what's expedient, right?
Exactly.
So, and sometimes I think that's one of the things, if we want to talk about solutions, what is the cycle breaker is you have to get into a place where you're uncomfortable enough
to deal with
to just pull up your big boy or big girl pants and just be like, you know what, I've had enough. We're going to make a change today. And it might be uncomfortable. You're already uncomfortable anyway. Yeah. So I mean, which uncomfortable do you want? You want to stay with your discomfort of the cycle that's eating away at your marriage day by day? Or would you rather just be a little uncomfortable one day and just be proactive in doing something to actually change the trajectory of the path that you're on for the better? I mean, I think if you look at it logically, common sense would say, I think we both know which one is the right thing to do. But sadly, our human nature sometimes stops us.
Go with what's comfortable.
Yes. And in that moment, we're so used to like the instant gratification culture that we've grown up in. So it's very easy to lie to ourselves and say, I'm just going to do this a little bit longer. Or I'm just going to sit here and kind of simmer and I'll change it one day. One day. When is one day?
Or hope for the situation to change itself.
Yes, by itself. Oh, maybe my spouse will change. Or maybe that thing will stop happening. Yeah. Or, one day. You're always waiting on someone else to take the initiative. But you know what? The key is you.
Yeah.
You need to take the initiative.
Absolutely.
You.
There's a saying that says the change we're looking for starts with us.
Oh, yes.
And I think that is such...
I know it sounds a little cliche, but you know what? Not all cliches are corny and... I mean, yes, they are. But not all of them... A lot of them are true.
Right.
Some of them may just sound corny and there's not much to them. But this one...
The change we need.
This one's
sometimes starts with us.
Very
and so it's really sad sometimes where even the people that they have our best interests at heart, and we know they have our best interests at heart, and they would say something to us and we would ignore, and then a total stranger would come to you and say the exact same thing. And somehow in that situation, because you are at a point of total desperation, that's when it clicks in, the light bulb turns on, and everything begins to make sense. We are praying today that in all of what we are saying to you out there who are listening, one of the things that we want to leave with you is that you have got to hate the cycle so bad
Think of it
before
as
it changes.
It's poison.
Yes.
It's toxic. It's poison. And eventually it's just going to get to a point where it's going to be that much harder to change the situation. It's like the hardening of the heart,
which we talk about a lot.
When your heart is hardened, or your spouse's heart is hardened, it's going to be very difficult to get it back to a state where it's malleable again.
But that's what cycles. That's what they do.
And that's the thing. They harden you in all these different areas. They harden you in that cycle. It's like this groove. The groove gets more and more pronounced, and it's harder and harder to get out of the groove. Right? So it's just one of those things you have to make a conscious decision and a conscious effort to say, you know what?
I hate this thing.
Look at your spouse in the eye, and be like, get out of denial. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Get out of the denial of it's gonna change, because we both know it ain't gonna change. Right. It's just not. If anything, it'll change for the worse. It's like the laws of okay, now it's escaping me. It just escaped me. What is it? Like how everything is constantly breaking down.
Right.
Thermodynamics? Is that the one I'm thinking of? If there's any science buffs, please don't laugh at me. I think it's the laws of thermodynamics, where things are constantly deteriorating over time.
Right.
So it's the same thing with your marriage. If you don't take action, eventually it's just going to deteriorate. It's going to get worse, not better. You know how we age? We get older over time. We decay. We don't get younger.
I'm not getting
Stop
older.
Stop it.
I don't know about you. Good luck, don't crack.
Oh, I knew that was coming somewhere. I knew it was going to get inserted in there.
But I guess, those that are listening, you get what we're saying. Like, if you don't deal with the cycle, you cannot expect the cycle to change. You cannot keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. There is a word for that. Absolutely. So our encouragement to you today, if you find that your marriage is in a rut, in a place of like deadlock, in a place of like, God, like we need a change, because if this change doesn't come, then we're going to have to make a different change. And that different change that we're talking about is a change that's going to leave lasting devastation in your lives forever. And that's the D word. We don't want to talk about that on this channel, do we? Because that's happening a lot around us. And this is the problem. When you don't deal with the thing that is causing decay, it will rot away. It will cause, it's like having a leaky roof. If your roof is leaking and you just sit there and watch it year after year, after year, that hole is going to get bigger. And it's going to cause mildew. It's going to cause, the roof to rot and to cave in at some point.
Isn't it funny how when we see this type of thing happen to a physical building, we're so quick to go fix it? Why don't we do that with our marriage, with our relationship?
I actually think it's because for some of us, we fail to understand the revelation of what marriage is. And marriage, as we have talked about on many of our other podcasts, is a reflection of Christ and His church. And so when you understand that your marriage reflects Christ in the earth and that you are just an extension of Him, you will fight for that thing. Both of you will fight for that thing, and it doesn't matter what happens. If hell wants to boil over, you are going to fight for your marriage. And we are just praying today that as you listen to this podcast, that something will spark inside of you. Something, the flame will be lit again. And you will want to fight again for your marriage. Perhaps you are at the end of your rope. Perhaps you're thinking, man, this podcast couldn't have come at a better time. Or maybe you're thinking, you know what, it's too late. But, we always say where there's life, there's hope. It's never too late. It is never too late. And you don't have to become a statistic.
No, you don't.
You don't. And it takes action. It's like the gospel. When you hear the gospel, you are now responsible to do something about it. Now that you've heard, and now that it's become clear to you that perhaps there are some toxic cycles in your relationship, in your marriage, and it's become clearer to you by listening to this podcast. Now you have a responsibility. And unfortunately, for us, we live in a culture where people don't want responsibility. They don't want to have to take action, having heard the good news, having heard that, yes, you have a problem, sir. Yes, you have a problem, man. And if you don't take care of this can be the result of that. And some people, they'll just throw their hands up and watch the thing rot to hell and do nothing about it. And we pray to God that you're not that person out there today. We pray that you are the person who in this new year 2021, that it will be a year of action for you, that you will begin once again to fight for the marriage that God has placed in your hand. The Bible says that what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Let not man destroy. So God placed you together, and he has given you the grace to battle the storms that you are going through, and you can overcome. It doesn't matter what it is. Thank you so much for listening. We enjoy speaking to you every single week on these various topics that we are throwing out there. If we can ever be of assistance to you in any way, is there anything that we can pray for you about in your marriage, in your family? Would you reach out to us today? Would you share this podcast also with a friend or family member you think this would benefit? Please reach out to us on social media. Follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, Make Your Marriage Great Again. Or you can find us at our website, makeyourmarriagegreatagain.ca. That's makeyourmarriagegreatagain.ca. We are out to see a marriage revolution
Yes, we are.
in this culture.
Speak it.
Yes, we declare that over your lives today. God bless you. Until next time, guys, keep it
lit.
Take care.